How are white people stereotyped in predominantly non-white cultures? My wife from Cameroon was very surprised when she first saw white people that were poor. She didn't think it was possible. However, once I went to visit a market and I heard a guy shout, "White people are rich, but not this one. This white guy is poor." That was probably a clever way to get my attention to sell me something. Maybe as a consequence of being thought of as rich, white people are very important or prestigious. Once we met a cousin of my wife who was bragging that her husband had several cars. My wife replied, "Yeah, well, my husband is white." In Cameroon, most people believe in sorcery. One guy who was apparently knowledgeable about these kinds of things told me sorcery doesn't work on white people. +10 magic defense. Frick yes, hidden racial bonuses for the win. In the mountains of Peru, it's an urban legend of sorts that white people will steal children. So much so that when I'm around a misbehaving child, the mother almost always threatens the child by saying that the gringo, me, will take you away. That's kind of funny. As a white, I hold the stereotype that many South Americans would kidnap me and either sell me for ransom or as part of a substance cartel plot. Back in high school, we had 60% foreigners, Korean or Taiwanese mostly. The funniest thing I've ever been called was a round-eyed burger muncher. The kid was serious too. When I lived in the Middle East, I was told by an Arab friend that she always thought that white people, mainly the women, were very loose with their bedroom morals, and stuck up. It explained a lot of the not-so-nice things some of my classmates said about or to me before they got to know me. "You're not loose and stuck up like the rest of us? I'm so confused." "My grandfather was killed by being a stuck-up loose woman, you insensitive clod." "Oh, that's probably how I'm gonna go too." "We'll just mud wrestle our confusion away, as is the white custom." A lot of my Middle Eastern white friends think that white people only ever eat turkey and mashed potatoes, or meatloaf. Well, to be fair, there are definitely certain gym-goers who would exclusively eat turkey if they could. There are also some Caucasian replies to this statement. "That's ridiculous. We only eat bacon cheeseburgers and fries, of course." "I nominate the milkshake as the official white person drink." I lived in a predominantly Hispanic area, and one thing that was always associated with white people was money. You were a rich white kid no matter how much money your parents had. No matter where you lived or how poor you were a rich white kid. "Hey man, look at Richie rich white boy over there, strutting around the Walmart car park, begging for change like he owns the frickin' place. Rich jackass." Among Dominicans, white people are considered rich and generally friendly. We also think that no crime occurs around white people. It's considered highly respectable for a Dominican woman to have a white man, even if he is a low-life substance dealer. I can honestly say that most Dominican mothers would rather have their daughter date a white substance addict, garbage man, than a rich black doctor. White people are considered so above everyone else in our society. The funny thing is that to outsiders, Dominicans are black. Dominican women in the US want to be as far away from black culture as possible. They think they're white, basically. It's quite funny. When I went to the Dominican in October, they treated us like frickin' royalty. It was ridiculous. Our busboy told me he hated black people, which confused me. I assumed he was talking about Haitians. And all of the women wanted kisses from my blonde-haired, blue-eyed kid. They'd all call him over with Nino Blanco and ask for kisses on the cheek. My wife said, "Well, at least we know he'll never have a problem with the ladies in the Dominican." In Zimbabwe, white people are thought to have no knees. This is due to them wearing long trousers and dresses all the times, apparently. It's also, apparently, extremely funny to them. This is extremely funny. A real knee slapper, or a long leg slapper as my white brothers would call it. My brother's in jail for being a knee slapper. It's classed as racially aggravated assault. I've been to Liberia a couple of times, and I've picked up that a lot of the people think that the white people are rather ignorant of how the world works. They're very nice and helpful, but they make you feel like a child sometimes. Most of the time you have to rely on actual children to figure out what the heck is going on. In all fairness, perhaps you should have let them watch out for you, even if it makes you feel like a child, given that you're visiting fricking Liberia. Quite. The kids who I met there are more mature than a lot of my grown peers in the US. That said, they will kick your skinny white butt in kickball. Holy balls are they good. Stereotypical white statement. "I'll use my credit card."
"Oh, and do you have any non-dairy creamer?"
I used to live in South Korea, and according to my friend, there's a belief amongst a few Asians that white people are less evolved because they have more hair.
I'm a balding white male. Am I evolving? Will I get superpowers?
My chemistry teacher always said, the more hair I lose, the more head I get.
That's actually a brilliant joke. Most kids won't realize the dirtiness of it until they're long gone. Or I need to get my mind out of the gutter.
I've lived in Tokyo most of my adult life. There's a stereotype hierarchy that goes from foreigner, that's the most important, then to the subsets of white, automatically considered a loudmouthed American who only speaks English, or black, automatically considered a hip-hop gangster who only speaks parody MTV English, or Asian. Yes, that's a stereotype in Japan. You'll be considered a dirty, poor Asian. I'm a musician, and unfortunately my appearance means I fall into a further subset. Dangerous foreigner, probably a drug dealer. Because in Japan, everyone assumes most crime is by foreigners. Actually, crime by foreigners is proportionately much lower. So I get stopped by police all the time. I should add, just as being a black guy in a nice suit getting a coffee in Manhattan is a very different experience from being black with sagging pants and walking into a truck stop in Alabama, so Japan has a wide range of contexts which will affect your treatment here. My friend from Vietnam always talks about white people being crazy. He'd say if a black or Asian guy wants to kill you, he'll just shoot you. But if a white person wants you dead, he will eat you and commit the unspeakable act on your family.
Well, to be fair, in Vietnam, it's not hard to see where this one came from.
White people dance with their elbows instead of their hips.
False. I do not dance at all. In your face.
Then you ain't no friend of mine. White guy here, but when living near the border, I had 3 different Mexican guy friends tell me on 3 separate occasions that white women are freaks, i.e. promiscuous and adventurous to the point of intimidating. Apparently I've been hanging around the wrong white women.
Nah, you just haven't been hanging around enough Latina women. White women are freaks in comparison, going by general cultural tendencies.
Oh, I know, the Mexican girls had flirting perfected beyond all comprehension, but from what I could tell, that's as far as it goes. See Pierce Brosnan's quote as Julian in The Matador. After flirting with some Mexican schoolgirls, he says, "I hate these Catholic countries. It's all blushy and no..." redacted by the narrator of this video. Where I grew up, the word for white man was mzungu. Came from the word kuzunguka. It means to walk around in circles. In my opinion, this is a good basis for what they thought of white people.
They sell shirts with Mzungu written on them in Kenya, presumably to tourists. My white father bought one because he thought it was humorous to have a shirt with "white guy" written on it.
Did you grow up in Zambia? I was there this past summer, and wherever I went, people would point and yell Mzungu.
Note to self, if ever in Africa and people yell Mzungu, start walking around in circles and observe reaction.
I have one of those shirts. I bought it in Uganda and it says, "My name is not Mzungu." I heard that word so many times in those 2 weeks that when I finally saw the shirt, I just laughed and threw copious amounts of money at the lady. They knew how to work the tourists, haha. I mean, it sounds like it would get you laughed at in the country for wearing it, but if you don't mind, great. Also, I hope you wore it back home just to confuse people. In Western China, where seeing a white person is so rare that people would stop dead when they saw me, stare, and often pull out a camera to snap some pictures of or with me, white people are considered beautiful, fashionable, sometimes ignorant, and a little sneaky. They assume we all speak English. Most people assume that I was British, I'm American, because I'm skinny. In fact, I had people ask me, after finding out that I'm from the US, "Why are you not fat?" I didn't talk a lot of politics with everyone, kind of a touchy subject in China, but I talked about it with the family I was living with. They thought that Americans were warmongers. They thought it has been too long since we had a real war on our soil and we've forgotten what it's like. We go into war to try and help people, but their opinion is that war helps no one. Some Koreans jokingly think that a lot of white American people greet each other with "Yo, what's up, man?" with the hand grab chest bump. Every male I know under age 22 does this regardless of race.
Male under the age of 22 here, hand grab chest bump overcomes all barriers.
As a Chinese person who mainly grew up in the United States, I don't know much about how whites are stereotyped in China, but my parents do. Essentially, in China, people have a love-hate relationship with white people, wanting to be like whites, which is mainly just Westerner. They want to be this way because of the power and status it represents, but at the same time are resentful of that power and status. By the way, in Cantonese, a slang term for blacks literally translates to fermented soybean, because of the black color of fermented soybeans. People will fall head over heels around a white person to the point where they'll just hire random white people to attend important parties or become spokespeople for their products. Contrast that with the disdain that they have for Chinese that come from America. My mum once said that if you, as a Chinese American, ever want to go back to China, that you'll get better waiter service if you bring along a white friend wearing a business suit. Sad, but true. There was an Economist article a while ago that talked about how Chinese were crisscrossing Europe to buy a lot of Western goods because it was a symbol of status in society that you could afford to buy those things. Many Chinese, likely due to a lack of education and exposure, are what I'd like to call extreme passive racists. This means that they have very stereotypical views of other ethnic groups, but they don't plan on taking action on those beliefs anytime soon. I'm sure it's like this for many other cultures as well. So you're saying that if I moved to China and bought all my suits, I could do well for myself without a full-time job? I'd schmooze and eat for a living if that was an option. Yes, in fact, there's a lot of people whose full-time job it is simply to be white and wear a business suit as part of a group of people in China. Now we know what Barney Stinson's job is. Ha! Please. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. I went to Nepal last year and apparently they believe white people never work. I was helping build playground equipment and crowds of people would show up to watch. They would gawk for hours. It weirded me out and this is what I was told when I asked. When I was in Nepal, some kids bathing in the local river yelled, "You're American, you eat cats." I thought it was hilarious. My Asian friend told me that all of her friends always felt that the white people they'd encountered smelt like milk, all the time. I've heard this too, and it makes sense. People tend to give off odors based on their diets. Only white people drink so much milk and cheese. Most of the rest of the world is lactose intolerant. Washichu, he who takes the best meat for himself. I'm a white guy who lived on the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation for a few months. I always thought that Washichu was the only slur I've ever been called that actually bothered me. A young Oglala told me it means takers of the fat, for white people killing buffalo and only taking the fat. The best part. We had a little joke or pun at meals. Who took the last piece of fry bread? Washichu? Other stereotypes held by some Oglala were that we're all incredibly hairy, which we pretty much are compared to most Native Americans, and that we're all uncircumcised. I still don't really understand the uncircumcised thing, but I saw that a lot in graffiti. In Gambia, we think you're really nice. Seriously. I live in Bangkok, and here, white people are seen as rich, culturally disrespectful, and for the men, specifically, randy deviants. Also completely unable to eat spicy food. There's a few stereotypes I grew up hearing about in an immigrant mixed race, South Asian and African, family in the West. These mostly seem to be about middle-class white people. Note, I'm simply reporting these, I don't agree with them. I'm writing them as if my grandparents are saying them. For example, white people don't love their kids as much because they kick them out when they're 18 and don't support them after that. Also, white people are not as educationally driven when it comes to their children. For example, they won't work long hours in a multitude of jobs and save pennies to send them to the best schools and hire extra tutors and focus on their kids winning maths championships and stuff. The exception to this is Jewish people who are very admirable. White kids, in turn, put their parents in nursing homes as soon as they're able, which is unacceptable. White people are all into artsy-fartsy things like liberal arts and art school and painting that don't get you anywhere. They don't realize that the only worthwhile paths are medicine, law, engineering, pharmacy, sciences, accountancy, and business. White people eat really bland food, like they eat things like chicken, cooked only in salt and pepper, and carrots in strange creamy sauces. White people like to go to India, Africa, etc. to discover themselves, which is hilarious because then they start wearing saris and things and thinking that if you use curry powder, you've made a curry, and attributing erroneous spiritual wisdom to ethnic people. White people are not as clean. For example, white people will put on clean clothes on an unbathed body in the morning, and they only use toilet paper in the bathroom. As in, they only use toilet paper and not water to clean their butts. Also, they wear shoes in the house and own a lot of cats which walk on their kitchen benches. White people are more random about doing the deed, specifically white women. If you take them to a fancy restaurant and give them a rose and chat about poetry, they will sleep with you. Disturbingly, this is according to my grandfather. That's apparently all it takes. Some white people smoke green herb with their kids. White people drink a lot, especially white women who often inexplicably consume wine alone. White people are obsessed with wine. Oh, and one more. White people are too gentle with their kids and don't discipline them properly. See also Russell Peters. Wow, some of these, I won't say white people, but they're accurate to Western culture. Wine, for instance. The first one is funny because in the States at least, the best thing you can do for your kid is make sure they're independent. Americans thrive on the idea of independence. Funny that, to other people, that means you love them less. Out here, we'd find someone weird for living too long with their parents, psychologically weak and codependent. Well, that last one was a real bundle of opinions. Gotta say, this whole thread has been really educational. And no, I won't be doing the accents for some of these cultures, for hopefully very obvious reasons. The stereotype of whites amongst South Asians is that white people can't manage their finances properly, and that they are, in a selfish sense, self-concerned rather than being considerate about others. In that parents kick out kids at 18, and kids throw their parents into old homes, all because they're self-concerned and only care about their own lives. Also that they can't plan for the future, part of why they're poor with finances. Also, white people, particularly Americans, are scared of everything. Seatbelts, pollution, terror attacks, etc. And by that I mean to an unhealthy level of scared of stuff in their minds. That's generally the stereotype anyway. I've later updated this to address people rightfully bringing up my calling Asians inconsiderate. Keep in mind, the thing of most importance to South Asians is family, and it's family and social circles that they feel deserve the most attention. Given the highly populated natures of these countries and the laissez-faire styled capitalism society, one quickly realizes that being considerate to everybody is shooting yourself in the foot, unless everybody else is also considerate, which is rare. Thus, this consideration is limited to your family and friends. It's not as extreme in South Asia, in that they're willing to help a random stranger if it isn't detrimental to them, but the further extreme in an even more populous country such as China can be seen with the toddler and van accident. So I'm just giving that perspective where they're perplexed by why white people don't have any consideration of the ones they love, family. And you dolts, I don't mean that whites are literally afraid of seatbelts, rather the wearing of seatbelts from fear. I'm also South Asian, and I think that most of the stereotypes I've heard come from the fact that South Asians, and most Asians for that matter, are very collectivist, while America is becoming more and more individualistic. Therefore, people assume Americans don't care for anyone but themselves and have no respect for family. As someone mentioned, putting your parents in an old folks' home rather than caring for them personally. And have no culture as a byproduct of not having any traditions or community. Interestingly enough, I know many people in my parents' generation who emigrated to the US, who abhor the idea of their children, in my generation, taking care of them in their old age. They like the idea of being independent and have no desire to do the work that generally goes along with staying with your kids, like looking after your grandchildren all day. As a Caucasian who lived in China and other parts of Asia for some years, I'm generalizing a couple of stereotypes I came across. Not everybody has them, of course. White people are all from the US. I'm not, by the way, and can all speak English. White people all have money. White people have more beautiful skin and eyes. White people who marry a local and have a kid will have a very smart child, because it's mixed. White people cannot understand Chinese, so it's fine to talk about them openly even when they're 1 meter away, never mind if they understand every word. Many white people have a more open attitude towards relationships. White people can be more rude, but that's mostly okay because they don't know better. As a pink, I mean white, in China, I've pretty much never encountered hatred or open attacks. The racism, for better or worse, slightly favors white, which I suppose has to do with the average income of foreigners there. Chinese have a lot of whitening products advertised, which I suppose may have to do with certain lower status jobs like field workers having more exposure to sun. Hence, they're darker. However, my views are filtered from the racism I as a white encountered. In other words, there may be a lot of stereotypes I've never heard of because nobody told me, or because of the language barrier. I speak a bit, but wouldn't understand everything. All in all, Chinese were incredibly open and friendly, including being openly outspoken about race. Note that the stereotypes some Westerners I talked to had about Chinese were much more brutal than this. They're like ants, uncreative, can't be trusted, etc. were some of the bad racist highlights I encountered. Also note that the stereotypes of Chinese in relation to blacks are worse too. Talking about race, I've asked a couple of Chinese, what would your parents say if you dated a black guy? And the answer was often that the parents would be strictly against this. As a final note, let's repeat. Above stereotypes are not held by all Chinese. Maybe not even the majority. Maybe they're only a minority. They're just some vocal patterns that I ran into. In my family, I was always told by my parents that white people were lazy, never put value on education, and had no culture of their own. It's obviously not my own opinion. Chinese here. My parents think that white people are all divorced. I'm surprised this hasn't already come up. When I lived in the Bay Area in San Francisco for about half a year, any of my friends that were Chinese or Korean thought that all white people never took their shoes off. I was constantly reminded to take my shoes off when entering their houses because they thought we all just walk around the house dragging dirt everywhere. Chinese in China view white people with fascination and curiosity, like they're aliens from the planet Caucasoid. They generally don't have strong negative opinions of white people. However, Chinese expatriates living in the Western world think most white people are extremely selfish and completely tactless. Many are also seen as outwardly polite but inwardly racist to some degree. Some, not all white people, are seen as excessively aggressive and have very incurable alpha male syndrome. They seem to be poor problem solvers, only able to plan 1 or 2 steps ahead. They don't like to think unless they have to. They can be very attractive but age very quickly and seem to gain weight easily, especially the women. They're thin-skinned, and in negotiations, dealing with them bluntly and directly is the preferred approach over diplomatic and passive-aggressive methods. Also, never let white people borrow anything for very long, because after a while, they'll consider it theirs and won't return it. I lived in South America for 9 years, and the predominant stereotype is that white people are rich, entitled, and immoral. White women are seen as easy. The former comes from nearly a century of abuse from the US government and corporations, particularly the latter. US tourists most certainly do not help alleviate this. The latter comes from adult flicks. As a white guy, I ran into a lot of prejudice until people realized I was far more South American than American culturally, and spoke perfect Spanish. These feelings mostly manifested in me getting charged roughly 10 times the cost a local would, whenever I went anywhere or bought something. Until I began to haggle in Spanish and they realized they'd made a mistake in judging me. I wanted to offer my own experiences and noticed most of the comments up top refer to Asian stereotypes. When you subscribe, make sure to hit the bell to turn on notifications. Put the playlist on in the background to finish listening to all the stories, or if you want some vibey music to put on in the background, check out easymode. If you like Am I the Genius, give Am I the Jerk a shot. Everything linked in the description.